Medicine burns when touched by fire. The smoke curls and spirals upward, and plumes of it rising, swirling, and pushing themselves in ribbons, higher and higher until the smell of it becomes the ancient aroma of blessing, teaching, and communion. Within its fragrant cloud, you can feel peace descend upon you. There is spirit here. You can feel it if you allow it. And that is the heart of the teaching, the allowing. Welcome to the Urban Grief Shamans. Grief protests and stirs within us a profound defiance against living a life filled with numbness. It emboldens wildness, and like a thunderstorm, untamed. And as we learn, grief is the prime emotion for the soul's vitality. Contrary to common belief, grief is teeming with life. It resists being gentle, and yet moves us so passionately. There can be no doubt this emotion springs forth from the wells of the soul. In our podcast, we will explore this defiance, embrace its wildness, and find peace within its untamed vitality as we live in the hustle of everyday life. Join Patricia Jones, a psychotherapist, and John Moyer, a retired paramedic, as we explore the spiritual side of grief. Welcome to the Urban Grief Shamans. I'm your host, John Moyer. In this episode, we're joined by Elaine Egidio, who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in soul recovery and its transformative power. In our discussion, we explore the delicate process of soul retrieval, a cornerstone of shamanic practice. Elaine beautifully explains how trauma in its many forms can cause fragments of our essence to become dislodged, seeking refuge in safer places. This fragmentation, she suggests, leaves us feeling incomplete, vulnerable to external influences, and sometimes trapped in unhealthy patterns. Through shamanic healing, we embark on a journey to reunite with these lost pieces of ourselves, restoring wholeness and vitality. Thanks for joining us as we enter into our conversation. I was hoping that we could take a look at soul loss and soul recovery.
Absolutely. So for my understanding and what I've been taught and what I've learned through my shamanic practice is that when we experience things that are traumatic, with the grace and understanding, trauma is trauma. So it could be falling down and bumping your knee, or it could be falling down and breaking your arm, or it could be being in a car accident or something emotional happen, abandonment, anything in the human body that could be considered a traumatic experience or a harsh experience. There's just a little piece of ourselves that just goes off to be in a safe place. I could give you a psychobabble. We call that dissociation. However, we'll stay on the shamanic spiritual verbiage. And if there's a piece of us that kind of leaves, and it's for safety, because sometimes what's happening is just too much. When that happens, we're not fully ourselves, because we're not full of ourselves. We need to be full of ourselves, that vital life force. We need to have it be fully with us. So then from a shamanic healing perspective, then what we do is first of all, if a person comes to us and says, I need some healing work, what's often happens, I need a soul retrieval. First we say, we always connect with our compassionate helping spirits they're our co-creators of the healing help for the people that we're working with. And we check in and make sure that that's what the person needs. And when it's indicated that is what the person needs, we work with our helping spirits and we restore that vital force. Some of the things that happen when we don't have our vital force is that we might be too influenced by other people, places, and things. Sometimes we try to fill that gap within ourselves with maybe aren't so healthy for us or balanced. And sometimes it kind of leaves us open that we could attract influence that is not us. It's not fully us. And then the soul retrieval process is really pretty simple. When the shaman works with their helping spirits, it's very simple. And then, the person has themselves. I know for me, when I work with people, I always suggest that they always check to make sure they're not going back to work or grocery shopping or something, that they take it easy, that they give themselves some good, mellow self-care time. I often suggest that a person go out in nature and sit by a tree and really feel the tree against their back, experience the roots of the tree, connecting into the earth and connecting with the support system of the roots of other trees. And then also the bark, the tree opens up and has the beauty of the sky and connecting. So you just bring all of those healing elements into yourself after having I like to call it a ceremony, the soul retrieval ceremony.
Mm-hmm. I can remember the first soul retrieval. Actually, I had my first soul retrieval and energy extraction, one after the other. And both times, it was like all I remember was seeing light flashing. My body became so cold. I couldn't, when everything was done, I was crying. I just was, something was brought back that's been missing for a long time. And the reunion, I guess I could call it, was just so full of joy. I don't know why I was crying so hard. And then when it was all done, all I could do was just lay there. I couldn't even move my arms or sit up. And the poor fella, he's probably used to it. He's a wise old one, and went and got me a blanket and just let me recover and then sat up. And so there's a lot of power in returning parts of ourselves, fragments to us. And as you're saying, I know that I always think of it as just a loss of life essence. And and when we don't, as you mentioned, just emphasize is that when we lose parts of our soul, we lose parts of our purpose, our life, energy. And you're right, it makes it easier for spirit attachments that don't belong to us, that influence, and that's a whole another episode right there. And and what I found for myself, Elaine, was that we develop all behaviors that we try to compensate with. They can be addictions, depression, pulling back from the family. You just don't belong, but you make it worse. And you feel that you don't amount to much. And as you said, you use the word dissociation. And I think that's still a good word, but it's coming from, it's what happens. We just dissociate from who we are as people. I think when we lose our identity of purpose, why we're here.
It's extremely sad and distressing. And especially a lot of times when people don't understand what this is all about, it brings all sorts of feelings about themselves. You were saying self-worth, shame, guilt, lack of sense of purpose. I was in a clinical session and trying to explain to people that I wasn't going to be able to do soul retrieval because that wasn't my purpose there. But I wanted them to understand how sometimes there's pieces of themselves and then they fill it with things that aren't quite healthy. And so I used to say, think of a piece of Swiss cheese and all those holes. And then you start filling them with all this other kind of stuff that's not so healthy. So how can we would do like little ceremonies, but not shamanic because it was not the setting for little ceremonies to release with my intention of that would be helping them release. And then to replace them, we would say joy and caring and self-love and all that stuff. It was really, for me, very empowering as a clinician and as a shamanic practitioner to be able to translate that over to another setting to make it more available. The other thing, if I may, when you were talking about the extraction work, and that is true. Oftentimes when there is soul retrieval, for me, when I work, it's indicated also to do extraction work. And I was pondering this morning about holding on to things and even how much our organs can hold on to things like grief and loss and how important it is to remove that, to allow ourselves to remove it, to be aware of and to remove it from our organs, from our spiritual being, to then be able to have the space. People often have said, oh, I was finally able to take that deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of tears. Absolutely. You are unique and special. However, there's a lot of tears in many people who have received soul retrieval. And getting warm, I always have a couple of blankets handy because you're feeling yourself and you can feel the vibrations. It's really pretty. It's a beautiful experience to be able to return someone's vital essence and for the person to be open to receiving.
Mm-hmm. Just for the listeners, a big influence for myself and Patricia is Frances Weller, who I was mentioning to you earlier, who wrote the book Wild Edge of Sorrow. I highly recommend that for our listeners to go out and buy a copy if they haven't already. But part of the loss of essence, what Weller would describe it as numbness that overcomes us, where we just not to feel anything anymore, like a loss of compassion, a loss of being able to love big, start to have self-abuse, that we just don't think that we're worth it. Then I just can't imagine how somebody could love somebody else or something other than themselves with any kind of intensity and truth and honesty. So it's a big thing to lose our life essence.
Yes. And the book sounds fascinating. And I really think it's a beautiful concept from what you shared with me before on how man and nature, because I believe that there's soul loss in nature also that affects us as humans and in some grief or some disconnect that we feel, because nature is also experiencing that. Places in nature, I could go on. I know as a practitioner and a true understander, I believe, but we are here to co-create with nature in many ways. And so I myself have done soul retrieval with permission of a place in nature that I feel has experienced soul loss, maybe from the way that we humans have forgotten that we need to be co-creators with nature in order to be able to have a vibrant, vital force world. And so I think there again, as I said, I do send people out in nature to support the healing work they just had done, to help them remember the healing work that they had done, to help them remember to be grounded and present, but also to understand as practitioners that there are places in nature that need for us to be able to do soul retrieval or extraction work or the same work that we would do, only with permission. Of course, please don't go running off and doing stuff without permission on man or nature.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the nature side, because Weller, in his book, grief is, I think we underestimate the effect of grief. We're not used to working with our deep emotions. We've grown up learning that grief isn't welcome. And pretty much everybody in North America would agree with that, from if they're white and European, sure, I think. Mm-hmm. And so for Weller, that first gate is everything that you love, you'll lose. And so love and grief go hand in hand, because you can't have one without the other. And just in a nutshell, the more we understand that whatever we love, our cars, our family, and eventually our own lives, and it's that quintessential emotion, no matter how hard it is, it defines you as human. And it's not just that. And the other one was that earlier we were talking about shame and those parts of ourselves that are just banished. So we do that. We feel shameful about something, childhood, we get stained in different ways, teenage years, adults. And so we don't want to see it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want anybody to know about it. But that's part of us. That's part of ourselves that we banish. And so there's soul loss in that part. And then there's the loss of purpose, of not having people around to support us in our purpose and the gifts that we bring into this world. And there's loss from that. There's also ancestral grief that is passed down, that we all, for myself, my father was an alcoholic, his father was an alcoholic, and his father was an alcoholic. And when we do ancestral healing, what we try to do is break that and heal those parts that we might be carrying before. And there's some other gates that I won't go into now, but the whole idea is that whatever healing we can encourage for ourselves, it affects our offspring.
Correct. Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And also the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes that we don't remember that. I think that if we acknowledge doing my personal healing or doing healing for someone else, it's like that ripple effect. If you get up in the morning and say, okay, today I'm going to be kind, and you really start a night, today I'm going to be kind, and you greet people and you open doors for someone, all of a sudden you notice someone else is opening another door. The car stops so you can cross the street. What we do and what we allow for ourselves then really ripples out. You mentioned the ancestral piece, and that is so interesting, I think, when we're talking about grief. I think so many times that I work a lot with the body. And so we can find that our body holds on to things. And sometimes is it nature or is it nurture? If you're around people that are holding on to grief or choose to respond to grief in dysfunctional ways, such as so many times we get angry. Mm-hmm. And when we strip away the anger, underneath that is intense grief. Like you said, we're not allowed to feel grief. Give ourselves permission, give those around us permission to feel the grief, to allow the grief to emerge. And then we're not stuffing it down with all sorts of other stuff that's not really working. But so many times I find when there's like intense anger, if we can just move it aside, we have grief. And there's so many times that grief is, that's how it was. My father was an alcoholic, but my parents held their grief. They didn't talk about it. And then the next one and the next one. And that's really it's an important thing for us all to remember. And then again, we're holding on to things that's not allowing our vital force to expand.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think we can have spontaneous soul returning or soul returning. When we let go of some of those things, all of a sudden, then maybe go out in nature or do some meditation or some allowing your body to expand. So, wow, wait a minute. What was that? What just happened there? And that's something that was spontaneously returned, which I think is a beautiful thing also, that allowance.
Mm-hmm. Well, you brought up an interesting point for me. The whole idea of tending to our grief and why it's important is if we don't tend to our grief and we just keep pushing it down, it becomes hard and cold like lead. And this is where Weller kick in and talk about the alchemy of the soul. And to keep that grief warm and mobile and moving. So to keep tending to our grief, because we know the soul needs to express the grief that we're holding on to. And when we don't do that, then we start to notice small maladaptive behaviors creeping in. And it doesn't do us any good. It doesn't do our families any good, the world around us. And so it's important to tend to our grief either through shamanic methods or through traditional clinical encounters with psychotherapists or psychologists or therapists. I want to ask you about your experience of what do you see when you do a soul retrieval? Like, how does it present? And are you able to just touch any recent ones that you could describe?
It's really interesting because for me, my soul retrieval work has shifted. And what I'm shown isn't what I'm visually shown. It's what I feel in my body and what my helping spirits show me. Mm-hmm. It's always an amazingly beautiful metaphor for something that sometimes there's something. Might not look like the person. It might look like something in nature. Oftentimes it does look like something in nature that's despondent, that's lonely, that as soon as I show up becomes joyful and bright and shiny. Or sometimes it's something shiny that's under a little, maybe a leaf covering. You know how when you your leaves pile up in the
Yes.
fall,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And it's just this light that's seeping out. And sometimes it's totally this bright light. A lot of times I would have to say bright. There's a brightness. There's a vitality. It is interesting is sometimes it's this little hide and seek kind of thing, but my helping spirits are really good at finding those things. And if I open my heart, then I can feel it also. And when I'm, so then I'll bring back in my hands, and I usually just hold it for a moment and just share the love that I have for humanity. Perhaps if I know the person well, just the love that I have for them, and feel things get brighter and brighter. And then I do the process. I blow into the solar plexus, and I usually wait for just a minute to let that soul essence just move through the body. And then I encourage the person to sit and blow in the top of their head, and then let them lie down. When I do a soul retrieval, I've done a little healing work before I do the soul retrieval, the actual piece of it. And then afterwards I kind of power up more with my helping spirit who does the work with me, and just pass that power for the person afterwards. And then I just leave them be. Mm-hmm. I don't sit, hold their hand. I don't sit and touch them. I sit by them. They know I'm there. I'm in the process of thanking my helping spirits for supporting me in the work, and their helping spirits, because we do also, yes, their helping spirits to be supportive of the work, and the spirits of the space. It's always that's being polite, but just let the person be in their process until they rise, until they begin to move. And then I might guide them how to do it a little bit more gently, like don't jump up and kind of thing. And you could if you want, you can do whatever you want, but just allow yourself to feel. Just allow yourself to feel that what's expanding, how you're expanding.
Did you ever have soul fragments that didn't want to come back?
Have I ever had soul fragments that didn't want to come back? Not that they didn't want to come back, and that was more in the older days, but that were afraid to come back because perhaps they left because of some real traumatic situations that happened to humans, and they needed to know that the person was safe, and that where the person was safe. And sometimes the truth is sometimes if a person's in an unsafe situation, not that the fragments were not a different scenario, the person is in an unsafe situation, sometimes doing a soul retrieval gives them that vital force, that fullness of themselves, that's being who they are, that they can remove themselves from that too. But there were times in the older days where there was like, no, this person is safe. Because sometimes I know a little bit. I don't often need to hear the story anymore. I let my helping spirits take me to soul parts that are ready and willing to be returned to this person.
Yeah, I had a couple that just are popping into my memories. One was looking for fragments of this lady, and sometimes what I do see is younger versions of the person. And this particular time, it was something like a 3-year-old, but there was an older part of herself that left to protect the younger one. And I can't remember the story of why the younger one, but it was the older one left. I think she was like 7, went to protect this younger one. And I thought it was surprising, but it was just a teaching on how sometimes love works, that we'll lose parts of ourselves not because of fear, but out of love for something else. And I have to ponder that a little.
That does make a lot of sense. And there were times when when I did see more stories, and actually I did see similar situations where, that one part went to care for another. And and then you just need to let everybody know it's safe. And also that not only is it safe, but you are needed so that you can really feel filled with yourself. It's important for you to come back because that the person is able, and sometimes those kind of things definitely were part of the process, and that's kind of how I would handle it. this is great. You have so much love here. We just bring all this love there now.
Actually, it's a favorite one of mine that I don't want to reveal too much, but unbeknownst to me, it was a friend of mine, and she wanted to try the shaman stuff. And so the journey, sometimes what we'll do as shamans is do what we call a diagnostic journey, where we meet with our spirits and the spirits of protectors of the person who's seeking the retrieval for what they want us to do and get some background. But anyways, when the time came to do the retrieval, that mix of metaphor and premonition all came together. And what I saw was this, it was grass field. I was walking in the journey, and I came across this one white lily. And Elaine, it was stunning, the colors of it. It was just so pure and white. And I'm looking at it, and then it morphed to the outer parent. So now I'm looking at the reproduction parts of the plant. And I thought, that's interesting. And then I saw this old couple. Oh, no, I'll leave that one out. And then I saw this a small girl standing near a pond and would look very curious of the creatures that was in it. But she had this beautiful red dress and shiny black shoes. And so why would somebody in a red dress, for example, start hanging out in a muddy pond? And there's some more stuff that I won't reveal. But I'm trying to figure out, what does all this mean? It means nothing to me, which is often the case. And so I said to my friend, I said, this is all going to sound really crazy, but this is what I saw. And I don't understand the idea of the lily, the young girl that I brought back to her. She was excited for. She said that she was really wished that she had that childhood curiosity back. So that had merit for her. And the other parts all went in there. But she said, one thing I didn't tell you was that my husband and I have been trying to have a baby. And I thought, okay, that explains the lily. And,
sure. Reproductive parts.
Yeah. So I said, I don't think you have to worry about that anymore. And needless to say, a number of months, she did in fact become pregnant and had a beautiful child.
Isn't that because I've actually done soul retrievals and the person has gotten pregnant afterwards also, who had been wanting to get pregnant. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, and so I've heard of that too. I haven't had anybody who went through that way. But is it due to that you get more of your life essence back, or is there a healing with the organs? We never know that part. So we're going to have fun trying to think of it.
Yeah, I had thought about that in years. I don't believe, because it was quite a while ago, I don't believe that the purpose of the soul retrieval was so that they could get pregnant. I don't even know if I knew they wanted to get pregnant. I just know we did the soul retrieval, and then they went, oh, guess what? And we've been waiting, and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, well, that's pretty interesting. And then just moved on. So that's interesting.
It's again, when you see all these metaphors that have no meaning for us, and we're almost embarrassed to tell the client, this is what we see, this is what was said, or whatever, means absolutely nothing. I have no context to help you at all. And then they just beam. They got everything that they wanted in those metaphors. And sometimes people just need a little help to kind of touch the metaphor in a way that they can now start to understand, and then that metaphor unfolds for them. And it's kind of like a poem. So much is said, which in the spirit world, metaphors pretty much like that for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I know that. Yeah, definitely. Definitely the spirits speak in metaphors, like haiku sometimes.
Yeah. And the other thing I find is that why the soul retrieval is so powerful. I mean, it's all combined with getting your life essence back, but it's such a big one when you get these bigger parts of ourselves returned. Right. All of a sudden, you're emboldened. You have this courage. You have this more power that you're holding inside. And so if you have difficulties in your life, you either have the courage to make those changes. Like if you're in a bad relationship, that, no, I'm This is what I'm going to do. You have the courage and the strength to do that. Or you say, no, I'm going to stick it out, but I'm going to work harder to do whatever it is that I need to resolve issues.
Do you think, because again, this isn't my area of expertise, that when people receive soul retrieval, soul healing, that it does help them heal the grief, to support of the grief?
Yeah. The whole idea of healing grief is a misnomer. I use it, and I'm quite conflicted with that, the use of those words. But at the same time, I think the general idea is that you believe that somehow grief will have less of an effect on you. First of all, there's nothing that is broken in us when we are grieving or have deep grief. It's part of our maturation as a human being to learn more about compassion, more about love, and different parts of ourselves that are giving us a brighter, bigger, happier life in the long term. We still miss what we grieve for, but it's in a way that there's gratitude, and we have great gratitude for the things that were brought to us in those relationships. And
being more full of, however, then being more full of yourself would help you expand what you were just saying, the gratitude, the love, versus not being fully you. It's so hard to feel something beyond when we're not.
Absolutely.
So, as I was using the word healing grief, I was like, I'm sure there's something different, but the adjectives that you put in there really,
Yeah.
For me, anyway, I hope that your listeners were able to hear them also.
Yeah, I think soul retrieval from shamanic practices that we can do and dismemberment journeys. I think grief it's an initiation. And so it means that your initiations are all about going through that door that's opening up in a sense and letting go of the things that we no longer need. And a couple of things that I think are just part of the healing that is available to everybody. It comes from a different avenue other than a hospital or a clinician or that kind of thing.
I really admire the work that you and Patricia are doing with grief, because I think it's certainly something that, as you said earlier, that our society, we've been taught not to, and don't allow it to be, then it does become hard and impenetrable. And then is that really what we want? But I think that allowance, that grace, I do think grace and tenderness is really important.
Right.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of words that aren't graceful and tender about people who are working with whatever the words would be, have grief in their life and they're not sure how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe that's a good place to end for today.
Okay.
And I want to thank you so much for your inspiration and your words and your wisdom. So
thank you so much for inviting me and allowing me to touch the inspiration. Thank you. And thank you, listeners.
Grief is a heavy burden to bear and can often feel isolating and overwhelming. That's where grief circles come in, offering a supportive and understanding community to those who are grieving. You can't be both the griever and the container of your grief. This is the purpose of grief circles, to be the holder and the witness to your pain. Your soul wants you to speak of your grief, to express your pain, your loss, and to share your history and stories of that which has been taken. The Urban Grief Shamans podcast is an offshoot of Soulful Sorrows, a grief-tending website. Here, under the service menu, you will find our monthly circles. Please take the time to take a look and book into one or more of these monthly circles. Thank you for joining us into the world of shamanism and its connection to grief, healing, and spiritual growth. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the Urban Grief Shamans so you never miss an episode. And if you have any questions or would like to explore this topic further, please reach out to us. Your comments and support mean the world to us. Until next time, may you find grace and insight into your own spiritual journey.